Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Kathy Abercrombie. I am the House Chairwoman of Human Services, and I'd like to welcome you all to our working group for the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind persons. During the legislative session, we had talked about some of the issues that were still outstanding for people that are deaf, and I'm just going to refer to everyone as deaf and not go through the whole list. So I don't want anybody to be offended, but we are encompassing everybody when we speak. But we've had some issues through the years, and we thought that it would be wise for us to put together a group to kind of go over these issues, even though I know you do have your own advisory group through the Aging and Disabilities Commission. So with that, I would like to introduce two of my co-chairs on here and give them the opportunity to give some opening remarks. First, I'd like to turn to Robin Comey, Representative. Robin.
Hello, thank you, Representative Abercrombie. I'm just very excited to be here today to get going on bringing together a bunch of the stakeholders and try to smooth out some of the communication issues and make sure that we come forward with a really strong proposal at the end of this for our next legislative session. So thank you, Representative Abercrombie, again for including me as a co-chair of this group, and anyone can feel free to reach out to me at any time, either today or offline, and we can communicate that way as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you for volunteering to be part of this this work group also. And then my other colleague, who has also been, for many of you, is familiar, Representative John Fusco. John?
Good morning, Representative. Thank you very much. Good morning, all. It's good to be here. It's good to see you all. I'm very happy to be here. I kind of became engaged in this process through my friendship with Louisa Sobolewski. We are good friends, and we actually used to be neighbors. So I came and sat in on some of their advisory board meetings this morning. And then actually, I think my last meeting was on a Zoom where I kind of stayed quiet in the background and kind of listen. I'm a great listener. I think that's a great attribute. One of the things I came away with after that meeting was it appeared that there's a lot of people working really hard, and there's a lot of information, but perhaps it wasn't being prioritized in the best possible way. It seemed like the years were going by and not much was getting done, right? So I thought I could probably help in that regard from a legislative process. I thought maybe there was a little disconnect in understanding the legislative process. And that's the process that this group would need to go through to get language, kind of across the line. And I'm happy that this is not a mandated group. Like Kathy said, that's very important to understand that this is like a good faith, working group. People that are here, obviously the stakeholders are here because you have something, a value that you're trying to, to kind of move across the line. But we're here because we really want to help, and that's very, very important. One of the things I think is important to me that I wanted to articulate, and I talked about this with Kathy, was we have had many conversations, about where this group really needs to go and how we could get them there. These multiple groups, the deaf, the hard of hearing, the deafblind. And one of the things that it seemed to be coming up is that, or at least that I'm aware of, is that obviously 25 years ago or something, everything was in place that you could possibly almost have wanted. And then over the decades, it's been kind of slowly stripped away. And I understand that. And it appears to me that that's kind of a deep wound that still really hasn't healed through this community. But I'm here to tell you today, as kindly as I can, that it's time to kind of let that go and put that in the past. It's not all going to come back tomorrow. The world's a different place now. Things have changed from an administrative standpoint. So it's going to take some time, I believe, to get these communities back to where they need to be and get them the services that they really deserve. It's not going to all come at once. This may take several legislative sessions easily. But I think we have a unique opportunity here, these people who are actually great people and engaged people, and like I said, hardworking people, to kind of plant that seed and get that tree growing again, so that we can set a foundation for the future, so that in times when we have to come, ask the executive branch for money, that those appropriations, are something that they can no longer deny, and we can bring these programs and these services back to these communities. So, I am not a person who is deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, and rightfully so. The folks here today, except for Kathy and Robin, are not legislators. So we're going to get all the information that we can from you, and then it's going to be incumbent upon you to let us do our job, right? We have a very limited amount of time to get this work done. And we are going to need to take all that information, get it through a sifter, if you will, so that we can start to draft legislation, language for bill proposals for coming up really in February, which is right around the corner. So we have a lot of work to do. I would ask you all to try to please, try to remain focused and try to keep in mind that really we are setting, foundational stones here for the work forward for the deaf, hard of hearing and deafblind communities. And so I'm really excited about it, quite frankly, and I'm anxious to get to work. And so, again, thank you all for being here, and let's get going.
Thank you, John. I couldn't have said it better myself. We also want to acknowledge all of you that are here today, because you're all volunteering your time to try to put to make a system that we have even better. So I want to take that opportunity to thank the members of the Advisory Council for being here. Thank you, guys. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our community partners. We have John Acabelis, and I don't see Karen Buckley, but I'm sure she's going to be part of this at times also, from the Hospital Association. Thank you guys for being here. We also have from the Aging and Disabilities Agency, we have Elvin. And Elvin, if I don't say your last name right, please correct me. Chag? Is that correct, Elvin?
Hi, hello, yes.
Thank you.
My name is Alvin Shagay, yes.
Shagay. Thank you, Alvin. And also, most of you know Andrew Norton, who is our liaison for the agency. And we're also joined by Disabilities Rights Connecticut. If the person who's from Disabilities Rights, could you raise your hand? I'm sorry that I don't have a name associated with that person.
I am the designee for the executive director. My name's Marissa Rivera from Disability Rights Connecticut.
Thank you, Marissa. It's very nice to have you here, and thank you for joining us today. So with that, why don't we just jump right into the agenda, and we're going to go over some of the areas that we feel as legislators that we've heard from you through the years. Then under new business, we will talk about other areas that you think we might want to address. I do just want to remind everybody that, 5 meetings is not a lot of meetings to get a legislative agenda together. For most of you that have been on the council for many years, you know how fast time goes. So with that, we will jump right into the agenda. So through the years, one of the things that we've heard about is the interpreter standards. And Heather, who is going to be the gatekeeper of all the information for this work group, and also she will be doing the minutes of the work group, sent to everyone what the state statute is around interpreters and standards here in the state of Connecticut. Did everyone receive that? If you did, if you could raise your hand, that'd be great. Yes? Yes.
And we're going to take a moment to switch interpreters.
Great. Ready?
We are ready.
Thank you. So we have what currently is state law around the standards. We have 3 different organizations that we recognize as a state to be recognized as acceptable organizations for certification for the interpreters. That's RID, which is the National Registry of Interpreters, RID for most of you know, and then NAD, which is the National Association of the Deaf National Registry. And then a few years ago, per request of most of you on this call, we also included Massachusetts because we found that we had a shortage of interpreters in this state. And most of you had felt that Massachusetts was a good partner to be able to send interpreters into Connecticut. So at that time, we added Massachusetts as an acceptable certification program for individuals to come into Connecticut. I think that the statute is pretty clear on the standards that we should have here in Connecticut. And I think that, you know, as we go forward, I think that individuals really need to read that and kind of interpret what that language means before we start to dig into where any changes or adjustments, and as we like to say, amendments to the statute should be made. The other piece we'd like to talk about is higher education, accreditation, workforce development. How do we grow this job here in Connecticut, right? And who does the accreditation? We know that we had an issue a few years ago when I think RID went from an associate's degree to a bachelor's degree. And my understanding was at the time, Western University was not keeping up with that. They only offered an associate degree. So that's when we started looking at where we could grow our educational base here in Connecticut. Because like you, we all believe homegrown is the best way to go for our state. So that'll be another area that we will be discussing. And then the third piece was the bill that we had in the last session, which had to do with the mental health piece for individuals who are deaf. I know some of you are disappointed that the bill did not go out of committee, but that's why we put this work group together, because we found that it was more challenging than what the language had. I will tell you that all of the human services agencies have made a commitment to come to this working group and to talk about what they currently do, and then also where you feel there are lapses in services. So I think that that's going to be a really good place to start. At the end, we can talk about anything other than that you want to add. But again, I'm going to tell you, 2 hours goes pretty fast when we're talking about these issues. We also thought that structure-wise, what might be a good way to move forward with this working group is to also go every meeting, take one of the subjects and work on that. Because this way we can bring in experts on it. We could have material that we could review. And I think that we'll get more accomplished that way than to try at every meeting to talk about each piece. Let me just at this point, open it up to everyone that's here and ask if you think that that's a good way to start. And if you want to raise your hand, if you want to make any comments, please feel free and just introduce yourself before you start speaking. So I don't see any hands raised. Is there anyone that did want to speak that didn't, for some reason, their hand raising did not work on their screen? Because that also sometimes happens. Okay, seeing none, I think we're off to a good start then. I must be doing a good job explaining this so far. I also want you all to know that this is an open format, right? We're not here as legislators to kind of tell you guys what we see. We're just here to clarify what state statute is, what we currently are doing, and then to hear from you as to how can we make this system better. And then at the same time, you know, if you have advice or suggestions of people that we could bring in who have subject matter experience, we would be more than happy to reach out to them and see if they would be willing to come on this Zoom and to also discuss these issues. We were trying to do some of this in person. We know that it's not the ideal way to do this forum. But I will tell you that with the virus starting to go on the uptick, our legislative management is keeping the LOB closed from the second floor on, and we're only allowed to be on the first floor. And those rooms are not big enough to accommodate us to be socially distanced and then at the same time have the interpreters in there. So I do apologize if some of you are disappointed that we weren't able to do this in person. But I will say that I have to say, as someone that's been using Zoom for well over, almost going on 2 years now, I'm glad that we at least have this, right? Because we're at least able to get together and have this conversation. In the past, as you all know, we wouldn't have been able to do that and our hands would have been tied. So it may not be ideal, but I think it's a step in the right direction. Any other questions at this point as far as structure or who's on this working group? Please feel free to raise your hand. Hi, Harvey. So nice to see you.
Hello there. Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Harvey Corson. And let me introduce myself briefly. I have been involved with legislative work for several years now. And currently I am serving as chair of the Legislative and Education Committee with the Connecticut Association of the Deaf. Back in 2011 to 2013, I served as president of Connecticut Association of the Deaf. Now, my understanding is that all of this is just a wonderful idea, getting together a work group, and I am thankful for Representative Kathy Abercrombie for bringing this idea to light in the past, that we needed to regroup and have really good, solid discussions about what's coming down the pipeline, making those proposals to the legislative for consideration. So I really thank you, Representative Abercrombie and other representatives being part of this work group. We truly appreciate your dedication and willingness to work with us, especially with the minority population of the deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind citizens living in this great state. Now, you mentioned something earlier. You mentioned 3 different areas of consideration, but I also believe that there is one more area that we wanted to bring up today. I do know that there are some other deaf community leaders that are of similar mind. Now, what Louisa, the Connecticut Association of the Deaf president now, was thinking of a center, a one-stop shop center for deaf, hard of hearing community, because we don't really have an agency that deals with the registry of interpreters and the services that are provided through that. There's not a place within the entire state or within the government where we can call for help or call for information or resources regarding this topic. And I know that other groups of populations have those resources and have that connection, and we do not as of yet. And so as a low incidence population, we are very much in the state government. We are taking part in this. And with COVID, we've seen a lot of our deaf community leaders and volunteer their time and effort to try to help with the COVID situation and providing resources, answering questions. We're getting several calls, but there's no one out there within the state government that is providing this support. And so it is something that we want to take into consideration and become part of state government as a branch, an organization within state government to provide these resources. And that's, again, with those issues of interpreter standards, higher education, and the mental health issues, workforce. I think, this issue that I just brought up is something that's going to be important to tack on. And if we really want to talk about meaningful strides, meaningful improvement for the future. I think that it would be good if deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind community members had a place they could reach out to for information and resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harvey. It's always wonderful to see you on these calls and in person. You and I have worked together really well, I would say, and I hope you agree, over the last 10, 12 years. You were kind of the first person I met that really introduced me to what the needs are of this community. So I just want to take this opportunity to really thank you for that. So let me address a little bit of what we're discussing right now. And maybe we as a state have not done a good enough job, but we did hire somebody to help with some of these issues that is now part of the Aging and Disabilities Agency. I know at the beginning it was a little harder to get this up and running because it was a part-time position, but since then the commissioner has made it a full-time position, and Elvin is here today, and he is kind of the gatekeeper. No disability group has an agency that fills all their needs. There is no agency that can do that, because every issue may have to go through a different agency. So for example, Aging and Disabilities Commission agency is the gatekeeper of the standards, right? People have to register with them every year. They have that registry. We had talked about Elvin also being the person that people can call if they have questions or if things they are not getting the services that they need. So I think that we are addressing that. I don't think that you're going to see an agency per se out there that will meet all of your needs, but I think that we are working on it. And my hope is that as this working group moves through some of these issues, being that Andrew and Elvin are here, they can also kind of address some of those concerns with the commissioner. I also believe that by putting together the advisory group, that was also set up to kind of address some of the issues that are going out in the community, right? And, you know, the one thing that I have kind of said to you guys over the last few years, you know, is that when you have your meetings, you really need to structure them and kind of think about legislative interests that you have, right? And then you present them to us and we introduce bills. That's how legislation works. I know that we did, and Susan's here, Susan Yankee. Thank you, Susan, for being here. I think she would agree, well, I shouldn't speak for her. I hope she agrees that some of the work that we did through education, you know, was helpful, right? Because we don't know what we don't know as legislators, right? So your input is really important to us. But I think that we need to give Aging and Disabilities Agency the opportunity to grow under Elvin with that. Harvey, would you like to just comment on that before I go on to Maritza from Disabilities Rights?
Yes, I do understand. However, you know, I'm not here to complain about Alvin. He is a great addition to the Aging and Disability Agency, but he's only one man. He's only one person, and that workload. So when he was first hired, it was the registry dealing with all of that. However, I am not criticizing him in my comment. I just feel that one person is not enough. He's unable to provide all of the services and needs that his job description would require. I mean, there's no one really that can answer a lot of the questions and the issues that arise from the people within the population or the community. And there's a variety of issues and complications within this state. There are concerns from deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind individuals, and you can't expect just one man to answer all of these. And so if there is a possibility of a group of professionals that are knowledgeable and working in different areas that could arise within this service, that would greatly improve and would support, help all of this improvement that we're looking for. There's just a lot out there that is unavailable. So for example, if I need mental health services, any normal hearing citizen of Connecticut can call an agency for that, for those services and where I can find those services and so forth. But those in the deafblind, hard of hearing community don't have someone to call. So there are just so many steps that we have to take in order to get the help that we're requiring. And I think it's case in point that especially in the deaf community, mental health, I know that the legislator would be very supportive of mental health improvement. And I think that this is a good move, yes. But I really just have to be honest that I am shocked that there are 4 different state levels of commissioners, and they're not really necessarily providing that support to the deaf community and all that entails. And so we're having to work our way through, navigate our way through the system, just trying to get the information and the services provided. And just trying to understand, the cost involved in all of this, and hopefully trying to get services spread out at cost efficient rates for the deafblind, hard of hearing community. And it's just for those of us living within the state of Connecticut, it is just amazing to see the type of responses that we get. And it doesn't look very, very good for the state government at this time. For those that are working for state government, to have dedicated people working on these issues. And I'm just being brutally honest here. I think that's going to be a key point because there are so many within our own community that are just aggravated at the experiences that they're getting. So even if that one-stop center could be something that could be discussed and talked about, for example, the elderly citizens in the deaf community in the state of Connecticut. There's so many different agencies, it becomes so confusing that they give up. So if they could have something established that's a one-stop call center for them to get those resources and the information, that would be wonderful. But if we could have something like that for the deafblind community.
So Harvey, so that's what Elvin's supposed to be doing, right? Elvin's supposed to be the one-stop shopping. None of our human services agencies have a group, a collective group that works on issues for all of the disability, people with disabilities out there. So for example, when you talk about autism, they only have one liaison. Most agencies only have that. So to think that we're going to get a whole unit of people, I'm going to be honest with you, I think that's going to be really difficult to do. We have cut and cut and cut in our state agencies. We were lucky that we were able to hire Elvin, when we made the plea to the administration that we needed a gatekeeper. So that's what we're working on. But to think that we're going to get a whole agency again, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't see that coming to fruition. And I'm just being brutally honest with you also. You and I have had many conversations about this, and I'm gonna kind of talk about what my good colleague, Representative Fusco said. We're here today to make the system better, but to think that we're going back 10 years in time, that's not gonna happen, guys. So we're trying to work with what we have in front of us. Let me go on to Maritza from Disabilities Rights Connecticut, because she might be able to add some insight into this also. Hi, Maritza.
Hello. Thank you for allowing Disability Rights Connecticut to be part of this group. Yes, I can share a lot of stories of what the hospital or a hospital thinks of the registry list, how maybe there's a lack of trust. Can you hear me?
Interrupt for a moment. Can you take off your mask?
I can't because I'm in the office. It's our protocol.
Okay, do you have a clear mask for people that can read lips?
is someone who needs captioning or a sign language
Well, they
interpreter?
have captioning, but I know that people
Okay.
might feel more comfortable if they could read your lips. Do you have one of those masks?
I can get that for the next time.
Great,
Yes,
thank you. I would appreciate it. Please
sure.
proceed.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the one-stop shop. I will say that, our system with the state or information of what deaf resources are out there could be updated. I definitely feel like there's not enough information on the Aging and Disability Services website about deaf services that are available. It just focuses on the interpreter site and just the registering of interpreters, but there's no information other than that. So I would like to add that having more information and the of what we have available here at Connecticut for deaf people should be updated on that ads website. And I also have to excuse myself early. I have another training to attend to at 10 a.m., but I will be here for the next time. So thank you again. And I'll look forward to the minutes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marissa.
Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for adding to this conversation. Next up is Kim Jacobson. Hi, Kim.
Hi, I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. I'm Kim Jacobson. I'm an attorney at the Commission on Human Rights. We deal with disability issues, which would involve reasonable accommodations. So I'm really excited to be part of this conversation, and I thought it would be helpful for people to know what my specialty is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I apologize that I didn't recognize you when we first got on here. My apologies.
No
Thank
problem.
you for being here.
If it said Esquire after her name, we would have definitely had her say something.
I am an attorney.
I know.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, John. Sandy?
She's on mute.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Okay. Is someone interpreting for me, voicing for me? Yes, we do have an interpreter for you. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I'm not seeing that person, so I didn't want to assume. Okay. My name is Sandy Nzinga, and I'm from Branford, Connecticut. I am currently the president of the Connecticut Council of Organization Services for the Deaf. And we are an umbrella agency for multiple organizations that are under under us and that are affiliated with us. Now, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this work group. I've known some of you for several years. So I am glad that we had the chance to establish an advisory board and then now this work group. I do want to go back to the point that was mentioned about the commissioners of the different Connecticut agencies that are out there, and just saying that they don't see enough deaf individuals to justify full services. Okay. Have you ever heard that phrase, if you build it, they will come? If you don't have the services, then how can the deaf individuals in your area go to receive services? They become frustrated. They can't communicate with you. They don't have that privilege of walking in the door or opening that conversation. And so I think really there are a few commissioners who are heavily resistant or ignore the services that are needed for our community. And we're not sure why that is. We are seeking advice. We want them to seek advice from the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Deafblind Advisory Board. And I've sat on the advisory board since that first day that it was established. And it never, not once, have they sought information from us or consultation from us. They have not asked us questions in terms of technical support or expertise. There has been none of that. And now I think for the past, 3.5 years during all of this situation, there's been nothing. So we do ask that we call, different public agencies to come and ask questions about services and access. And they say they will, but they never attend. They never follow up on the comments. And so it's a lot of we'll say we'll do this, but there's no follow through. And so we're asking why this whole community is really kind of being ignored. And it's disconcerting. And there's been a lot of talk of, well, be patient. We have been patient. It is now 2021. And the ADA law, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was established quite a while ago, everyone. And so, I think it is time, especially when we talk about those mental health services that are needed, even physical health, going to hospitals or other medical services. And it's still in 2021, such a struggle. Also, you talked about that stop center, Harvey mentioned, and we do feel that we need that. Is it reasonable with the cost? That answer would probably be no. But what are some alternatives, some other options that we may have? Because we are talking about the entire state of Connecticut and one person, Alvin. He has that expertise related to our community? Yes, but that's just one person for the entire state, talking about all of the different levels and hierarchy in just one person with services. So it is a concern for us. I did want to just kind of reiterate that. But those are some issues, that we wanted to highlight. We just want to make sure that kind of stays in the forefront of everyone's mind.
And it's time to switch interpreters. If we can take a moment, please. Okay, all set with spotlighting. Okay, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Sandy, let me address a couple of the things that you mentioned, right? So as far as let's talk about medical for a minute. That's why we have the Hospital Association here, because we know that there have been some challenges. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been meeting with the Hospital Association for over the last year to try and address this. So I think that as we raise the issues, right, we are trying to address them at the state level. And that's where Elvin comes into play. So let me give you another example. We recently heard that there was an issue going on at DOL, Department of Labor, right? We didn't know that there was an issue, right? So my colleague, Representative Comey, was the one that raised this issue. Now she knows that her constituent can go to Elvin, who can look into the issue. We also have the Commissioner Porter, who is also going to have a conversation with the Department of Labor as far as the technology that they are using, right? My understanding is it hasn't been updated, and the time has come for that technology to be updated. So I think as you raise the issues, we are trying to address them with the agencies. I'm a little confused about the agencies coming to the table. I thought that most of the agencies were on the advisory council. I know that I've seen Department of Education as a liaison there. I think DEMIS has a liaison there. I know some of the other agencies have been at those meetings. So I'm a little surprised that that you feel that they haven't heard your concerns, because I think that's how we got the legislation done for the education piece, right? Because we had SDE in the room, and as we talked about it, even though we had to legislate it, they were the ones that were able to explain what the legislation meant. So I think that your advisory council has the opportunity to bring in agencies, but you need to be specific on what the issue is. And that's why this work group is here, because we need to drill down. We can't put all agencies in one bucket, because they all have different roles. And yes, I agree with you. I wish that there was a seamless system in place, but we currently don't have that. I will say that the governor has now appointed Commissioner Deidre, oh my God, Gifford, sorry, I drew a blank, as a new liaison to all of the human services agencies. And I think, and I had a conversation with her last week about where we need to have a better communication between our human services agencies. And that's what she's also looking at. How can there be one-stop shopping for all individuals with disabilities and without? So I think you're right, we need that. And that's one of the things that we're working on. So thank you for that, Sandy. I agree with you. Louisa?
Yes. Okay, this is Sandy speaking. Okay, so the registration for interpreters was set up, and then the first opportunity we had to include OPM, we offered to actually sit and help with advising of the screening of interpreters. And we were going to do that, but then the agency, a different agency was given that registry of interpreters without anybody getting back to us. So we did not even know who was involved. So I heard that there were 2 in-state agencies, but then 3 agencies were picked who were out of state. And so, all the whole group of interpreters was laid off. And then these agencies from out of state were picked. But how are we going to resolve any problems if we're not being communicated with? You cannot talk about a topic like that without involving the deaf community and the people who use these services. When we're talking about 3 agencies from out of state, that is a very different situation because they're not from here. And so we were really, really concerned about the fact that we were not included in this process. Anyway, I would let someone else have a chance to add some comments.
I'd like to address, let me address that if I may, Kathy.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, so I'm a little confused, and that may continue on. Obviously, there's as I said before, there's a lot of information. People have been doing this for a long, long time. Sandy, when you talk about the 3 the 3 outside agencies, I believe you're referring to perhaps 3 companies that are out of Massachusetts that are coming here to provide interpreter services. This is my understanding. There are 3 total services, right? I'm going to refer to my notes here. I apologize. So please allow me to do that. This is the RID, the NAD, and then Massachusetts. Right? Those are the 3. And I refer to Massachusetts as its own entity, though it may have multiple.
No.
Is that incorrect? Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
What we are talking about is licensed agencies that provide interpreters, but there's also private agencies that provide interpreting services, whether remotely or on site. And this is what I'm talking about, because the state will contract with several agencies as well as with private agencies.
As an RF.
And so these, and again, the services go whether it's for court or for hospitals, higher education, universities, and 2 of them are from in-state. Okay. And maybe one of them, yes, it could be Massachusetts, people like you mentioned, right? But there's also people out of state other than Massachusetts.
Okay, so you're talking about the private entities. And it's my understanding that we would obviously want them to be licensed here in the state of Connecticut. And then once that licensing has been approved, that they are then added to the registry. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is it my understanding from your representation that what you would like to do is have more oversight into the abilities of these perhaps private agencies who are licensed here and then registered?
Correct.
I'll be
Yes.
honest with you. That's one of the things I think that I can understand why no one's gotten back to you on that. I think I can understand why. That's one of the things that I think might, yes, is that important? I would agree with that 100%. But it's one of the things I think it might present a little bit of a roadblock. I mean, considering the things that we're trying to accomplish, to say that we want to intervene, I guess, in some respects, and to kind of watchdog the skills of these folks after they have been approved for licensing in our state seems a bit redundant, and it seems like your energy could be better spent somewhere else. If that means that we need to intervene on the licensing aspect of it through the state, I have no problem with that whatsoever. That's something that can be put into statute quite easily based on your concerns and conversations that we could have. But I'm a little bit, and I think I understand what you're saying, but I'm just a little bit concerned about, once we have there's many people who are, there's tens of thousands of people in the state, hundreds perhaps, that are licensed to do something. And I don't know where there's any other group, like say for plumbers instance, where the plumbers would come in and just want to have a group that of oversight to see that the licensing in place by the state is adequate and it's working for their industry. I think that is, I think the licensing aspects take care of that. Now, if I'm wrong, or if there's something you want to add to that to enlighten me, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say.
So let me just clarify something so that people understand. We've got a couple of wording here that I think that the public that might be watching this needs to understand. When we talk about outside providers coming into Connecticut to do interpreter services, right? We as a state statutorily say that there's three different organizations whose certification they can have to interpret here in Connecticut, right? So we have NRD, which is the National Register of Interpreters. We have the National Association of the Deaf National Registry, and then we have individuals from the Massachusetts certification. So I don't want the public to think that we have agencies that we're contracting with out of state. That's not what these are. Providers that are allowed to come into Connecticut because we have a shortage of interpreters. But the statute is very clear what kind of certification you have when you register with the state of Connecticut. Now, if this group is saying that we need to expand on that certification, right? If there's other organizations out there that you believe should be able to be interpreters into Connecticut, Representative Fusco is absolutely right. That would just be an amendment to the statutory language. But if you look at the statute, it is very, very strict as to who can come into Connecticut and be an interpreter. It also talks about the level of education that they need. So I really urge everyone to take a look at that statute and see if there's areas that need to be adjusted or amended to make it more strict for individuals to be interpreters here in Connecticut. So I just want people to be talking the same language so that the public that might be listening to this on CTN understand what we're talking about when it comes to terminology. Poor Louisa has been waiting. She had her hand raised for a while. I'd love to give her the opportunity to talk her issues at this point. Hi, Louisa.
Hello. Hi, and thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. I'm Luisa Soboleski, and I'm the president of the Connecticut Association of the Deaf. And, I've seen many issues coming up, and I would like to address and continue to comment on what Sandy Nzinga was saying. So, you know what? It was not a two-way street when we started having these conversations. And, for language providers, obviously for interpreters, there was an RFP that was set in place over the years. And recently we've had, again, a new RFP, but it was very difficult for us to figure out what was going on because we were not really included in that. And, the deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind community in the past, up until 2016, had a place to go. But as of 2016, things have changed dramatically. And so, we had a one-stop shop for many, many years. And it was a great system because it would address any issues, and the services were being provided smoothly, whether it was related to law enforcement, and any other emergency situations. But now we are the only state that doesn't have actually a one-stop shop for that. Vermont also lost their ability to do that a while ago. And so we feel that these communities experience a lot of frustration, and it particularly falls down to how to navigate the system. Because for non-deaf people, it's very easy to say, okay, just dial 911 and you will have services provided. But the first responders with 911, they don't have the necessary training. Oftentimes we call and we're hung up on, or people say, I don't know how to proceed from here or there, particularly with mental health and deaf or hard of hearing individuals. I mean, really, deaf people have to navigate a maze of ways to be able to get services or to get to resources. And of course, people get upset because there is no clarity in the message, in the information, in the accessibility of these services. And when issues come up, for example, in a hospital situation, again, there is no community liaison to make sure that this is a smooth process. In the past, we did have that. We had an agency that communicated with the fire department, with law enforcement, with hospitals, and not only communicated with them, but provided the adequate training for these people to be able to respond appropriately to the community. Right now, this is far from reality. And so, of course, when we call or we request something from hospital staff, and we do this repeatedly, they come back with, well, we're not sure, we don't know. And again, people from our community just give up. And many of them call me. I mean, I get 3-4 calls on a daily basis from people related, again, to interpreters, for hospitals, for this, for that. It's very, very difficult. For DRCT, we work together. By the same token, when we talk about trainings, there's a lot to still have to happen. And we do work together, but it's our work. During COVID, of course, things get even worse because we are looking for more and more information. And, for example, interpreters who come from Massachusetts and they have the certification recognized here, they do have a commission for that, okay? They do have the ability to have information related to vaccines, for example, the COVID vaccine, able to get that to their community. There is a one-stop shop there where people can get information and go there. And I'm talking about deaf, hard of hearing individuals, but we don't have that. And why don't we? I think we should have this in our state, a center. That's why we're going back to that concept of center that will have a lot of information in one place with clarity. I understand that you hired Alvin Chagay, and we know that one person cannot do everything. It's impossible. You know, we're talking about communication and language access, and it really bothers me because, again, many services are not adequate, including mental health services for deaf-blind individuals. I mean, they're almost non-existent. So it's not only our deaf and hard of hearing individuals, but also deaf-blind individuals. BESB is also the people who work for them are very frustrated because it's the same thing. There's lack of services. So, you know, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our concerns. But this is what I would like to add it.
Yeah, let me just address a few of your concerns, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim real quick from the Hospital Association. So the structure that was in place when we had the agency, that structure didn't go away, right? The same statutory language as to what agencies are required to support this community is still in place, okay? It is. We didn't change any of that language when the agency went away. And now, Elvin, so when you're getting calls, you should be directing your individuals that have concerns to Elvin, because that's what he's there for, to address these concerns. My understanding is his agency gets very little calls. And maybe that's our fault as a state that we are not getting that information out to the general public. And that's where you can be helpful to let us know, to let people know this is where they can go when they have issues. And just like we found the issue with DOL, right? Elvin's in the process now of working through that. So we do have, you know, I just want to be correct. We do have a place for individuals to go to address some of these issues. And then if we need to legislatively change statutory language, right, to make it more helpful for individuals of the deaf community, we would be more than happy to do that. But the structure never went away. What statutorily is required by public safety, by hospitals, is still in place. Jim, would you like to talk a little bit about how it works with the hospital situation for individuals when they come in?
Thank you, Kathy. Yes, I'm going to.
If you don't mind, real quick, Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can we switch interpreters? Okay, and Jim, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jim Acabelis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs at the Connecticut Hospital Association. And Representative Abercrombie, you were correct. You will see Karen Buckley and me as part of these meetings, depending upon what the specific topic is. We'll be partnering on this, but we are, I think, happy to be here today. And thank you. I'm looking at some friends who I haven't seen in a while. When we met with you during the session, you said, give me some time and we'll get back together in August and then develop a schedule to meet and talk about these issues. And you've done just that. So thank you very much for your commitment here. A couple of thoughts at this juncture. First, I think when we deal with the issues of interpreter standards, I think we need to be clear in how we should be clear in our discussion that the three entities that we know are those that will certify individuals, meaning if I was interested in becoming a certified interpreter, I would go to them to be certified. Are there issues with that process? And then are there then sort of a second group? Are there issues with interpreters once they are working for interpreting agencies if we were to call and seek an interpreter for a certain situation? But to sort of make sure that we're clear that if we're talking about the process by which someone gets certified and then once they are certified. So as we have that conversation, I think we should try to be clear there. In terms of this conversation about a one-stop shop, I think in my last year in having these conversations that there is a way, I think there's a way to do both. Meaning to have a one-stop shop, but not, and hearing you loud and clear about the difficulties in the budget and difficulties in changing the structure, and is to work, I think, with our colleagues at Aging and Disability Services to maybe refresh the website to make that for the deaf community more focused and clear, that the website becomes the one-stop shop. It becomes the way in which you find the services that you need, that leads you to Alvin, that leads you to the individuals that we know are out there. Before this meeting, I spent some time sort of looking through the website. And as I think Alvin has continued to advance what he's doing, there are additions to the website, but I think we could refocus them in a way that becomes really consumer friendly and really clear, is to make it upfront on the opening page of the website that then jumps to some way in which we can, I think, provide this one-stop shop. I'm trying to figure out a way in which to deal with both of the issues here. We know that, specific to your question, Kathy, we know, and we have been working since last October. For those of you that don't know, been working with my colleagues and now friends, Louisa, Sandy, and Barbara, and to try to deal with what are issues for the community, the deaf community, in receiving hospital services. We have a little break in our meetings for the summer. We hope to pick that back up again in the fall. We have, through this, provided Disability Rights Connecticut with a list of ADA, American for Disabilities Act contacts at all the hospitals. But it's a sort of a way to become and solve the problems. If you have a problem working with a specific hospital, who is the person that you can contact? So we think that we have work to do. I will say that the conversations that we have had have been in partnership, and we look forward to addressing those issues and picking up any issues that we can have from here and take back to that and work through, because there isn't a person that works in a hospital that doesn't recognize that in order to have the best outcome, you need to be able to work with, to hear, and to listen to every patient that is there. We need to, and the last year has been extraordinarily challenging. Been challenging for everyone, and I can't even imagine how challenging we know it has been for members of the deaf community. But we are committed to doing that, and will be part of all of these meetings. And just as my mind was jumped over that, I think on the website, one of the things that we have talked about is some way in which to not simply have the registry of individuals from A to Z, but somehow break it down into their specialties. So if you were a physician's office, or you were a hospital, or you were any other provider, and you wanted to know who has the medical certifications, you could easily jump to that section. Or if you're in education, or if you're simply in the community and you needed to have those, but figure out ways in which to do this through, as I'll call it now, a one-stop shopping website. But we look forward to this conversation. And again, thank you, Representative Abercrombie.
Thank you, Jim. Can I just ask you real quick so that we don't assume that everybody understands the process? If somebody comes into the ER, right? If someone's deaf and comes into the ER, what is the process currently? And how do you get them the necessary tools that they need?
This happens upon entry into the hospital. And I think, say that it is probably, and Louisa and Sandy will be the first ones to remind me, not the same process in every hospital that you enter. But you will enter a hospital. It will quickly become apparent that there are you are a member of the deafblind, or deaf and hard of hearing community. We will work with you to obtain, if we can, an interpreter, or work through the video relay system. We know that there is the constant, I think, issue of the VRI versus the personal interpreter. And it is one that is constantly a conversation and that we are having with the deaf community. So it is upon presentation. It becomes then the responsibility of the hospital to comply with the requirements to make sure that the individual has the ability to communicate with their provider, either through an interpreter that we can obtain or through a video relay, VRI.
So I guess my question to the bigger body here is, and maybe this is something that we need to think about, right? What is the latest technology that is being used out there or could be used for the deaf community, right? So is VRI the most effective tool for, say, hospitals to be using? So maybe that's something that we can also talk about in this group, is what is the most advanced technology? Because that's something that we as a state can also require through agencies, right? So if they're using antiquated processes, right, and we haven't as a state kept up with that, think about this as a group, what are some of the changes we can make there, right? Because I think the reality is that across the spectrum of agencies, as much as we would love to have an in-person interpreter, if there's an emergency happening, especially like in a hospital, I would think that, for any person that's there, they would want to be able to communicate as fast as possible. And if VRI is the system that's there and it's not the most effective anymore, that's something that we should kind of think about going forward, right? Because in person is not always going to be an option, even though we would love for it to be. So let's think about that as we go forward. Jeff, I know you've been waiting a while and I appreciate that. And I thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry I was joined a little bit late. I had something I needed to follow up on. But first of all, I just want to thank everyone for hosting this meeting and getting this group together to decide the best strategies moving forward to support the deaf and hard of hearing community. I do want to respond to several comments that were made earlier, plus add my own. First of all, before I continue with my comments, I do want to open up to say American School for the Deaf, ASD, also has Source Interpreting, which is an agency. And so I want to make sure I'm transparent. I am speaking as a deaf person and not an advocate for Source Interpreting. Regarding the RFP, I think it's a very similar policy process. You have to have the independent evaluation for licensure, and I get that process. Now, if the state of Connecticut wants to establish an RFP to select certain groups and do diversity training, would we have, a group of white individuals selecting diversity trainings to represent the state of Connecticut? No, you don't do that. You select individuals who have the expertise to evaluate and hire certain individuals. And so when selecting interpreting agencies that the state of Connecticut will use, not having someone with expertise on that selection committee doesn't make sense. So we have to check and balance that process of how they selected those agencies and make sure that there's transparency. And we've asked for transparency from OPM in their selection process, and it hasn't necessarily occurred yet. And so in terms of an agency that's working for the state of Connecticut, we just want to make sure that they have that skill and that expertise. Licensures for other career fields, such as plumbing or engineers, I'm sure within the state of Connecticut, you have that licensure process to ensure that they are evaluated and meeting the expectations of the state. It's apropos to the interpreting field. Regarding Alvin Shige, now, all along, I have always thought that Alvin was a part-time employee until I met with Amy, I believe it was maybe 2 weeks ago, and clarified that Alvin is now a full-time employee. And I was like, oh, that's new information. So therefore, one of those things I wanted to bring up is information sharing with the community. It seemed to have not been there. Now, I pulled up the website recently and I said, where is the link or the services for the deaf, hard of hearing? They have services for blind. I didn't necessarily see information regarding deaf, hard of hearing community. So if a person out of the blue wanted to contact the state and figure out who was the point of contact, it would be a very difficult maze to navigate. So I did want to clarify that comment that was said earlier. Another example is there was a question asked about agencies coming to the advisory board to asking questions but not having follow through. I think one simple solution is one agency, DDS, they came to the advisory board. We had a great discussion about deaf, hard of hearing, children within the state of Connecticut, and yet it is still a very fragmented system at this time, very siloed. And so I was thinking, where is the respect for the language and communication access that is needed? Where did that group go? Why aren't we grouping up these places instead of making it a very individual siloed experience? Now, I do understand that anyone with a disability, there is going to be regression if services are not met, are provided, if needs are not met. And so that is the point that we're trying to make, is that we don't want to experience more regression. In different agencies, we have, a diverse group. We have connections in the state of New York. They have a department, they have a deaf group home. They have deaf service providers, especially for that community. And they've set up these things in order to serve the local communities. And they haven't just siloed to where it's, well, only if we experience a deaf person. It's, we know we will experience it, let's prepare for that. And so other states have these services provided, and we have the discussions within the state of Connecticut, but it seems the follow through is what's lacking. It seems like, the deaf community as individuals out there, they don't have the voice that we do as the leaders of the deaf community. So we want to make sure that we're advocating sufficiently for them. And regarding hospitals, I really appreciated all of the work and discussions we've made with hospitals and interpreters and everything that you just recently said. Oftentimes when I go to a hospital and I ask for an interpreter, they bring out VRI, and that's video remote interpreting, which works for me. I'm fine with that. That fits my communication needs. However, when a live interpreter comes, that is great, but they contract with one particular agency and that's it. That agency may not be able to find an interpreter. And I'm like, okay, I have another agency that you can call, and the hospital will say, I'm sorry, we can't call that agency. We've only contracted with one. Therefore, they're not going to provide access. That is something that we need to consider. We need to make sure that there are a variety of options available in order to meet communication access needs. I do want to say I am grateful and I appreciate all of the work and discussion that is going on. In terms of CDL licensures for deaf drivers, for deaf individuals, I'm not sure what more I can do for that. I've written to the DMV commissioner. I've made personal calls. I brought it up to the advisory board, and still to this day, they have said a deaf individual cannot drive a bus. I drive my car every day, ladies and gentlemen. I drive my boat. I've driven a big, RV back on a lake. I can do whatever I want to do, and I am A-okay, but I can't drive a school bus.
And neither can you
we
rent a
have-
truck should you need to. Barbara Cassin just jumped in.
Now, the only difference that I've noticed is that one individual went to their doctor who had a good relationship with this deaf individual, and that doctor wrote a note for the deaf individual that allowed him to go ahead and get a CDL. But because I don't necessarily go and ask my doctor to do me a favor or to make an excuse for me, and I just want to make sure that we are not demoralizing or degrading these deaf individuals by saying they can't do something that they can do. And, as the executive director of the American School for the Deaf, a leader in deaf schools, I have connections with other deaf schools, and I see so many sheltered within the classroom when there are so many students out there around the state not getting appropriate education, not getting appropriate interpreter services provided within the classroom setting. We see that every day. So I just wanted to share my thoughts with you. Thank you very much for your time and listening.
Jeff, thank you so much for being here. And Harvey, one moment, please, okay? Jeff, thank you so much for being here, and your expertise is always, always appreciated. A couple of questions for you so that I understand a little bit better. So the RFP that the state did, right? What portions of it would you have changed? Because the way an RFP works, none of us get participation in an RFP. That is a contracting that goes on through an agency that even legislators do not have a say in that. And I'll be honest, I don't want to because it makes it, we have a very strict policy with that. But when the state does do an RFP, which is the process that we use for people to apply to do jobs in Connecticut, right? After the RFP goes out and these individuals are picked based on the results of their qualifications, right? We have an opportunity to tweak the RFP in the out years. So my question to this group is, what in the RFP would you have changed? Because you have the opportunity going forward to change that. So that's something for you guys to think about. Also remember that we have strict guidance around contracting as a state. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is if the VRI works for you, Jeff, with your disability, right? Because you said that works for you, I guess I'm going to go back to my original question. What other technology is out there that we as a state should be asking different agencies to use? I can't speak to the DOL issue. I'm not familiar with that issue, but your working group, right, your advisory council should be able to, through the commissioner, ask DOL to come to your meeting and explain why, CDLs are not given to individuals that are deaf. That's the opportunity that your council has. And I've tried to explain that to you guys through the years. You can call any commissioner to come and to talk about issues. When you had an issue with DDS in their group homes, right, and not having appropriate people there, the commissioner of DDS Jordan Sheff came to your meeting, I was there, and talked about what changes they could make. My understanding is he implemented those changes. So if you're saying that it didn't go far enough, then you need to follow up with these commissioners and let them know, hey, thank you for that, but we need to take it one step farther. So, you know, there is a process in place that can be done. Why it's not being done, I'm not exactly sure. But, you know, these are some of the things we can think about in this group that we can do in the next legislative session, which starts in February. With that, I'll ask Susan. Susan has her hand raised. And Harvey, we'll go to you after Susan.
Hi, wonderful to see everybody. This is Susan Yankee.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. This is the interpreter again. We are going to take a moment to switch interpreters. Okay, we're ready. I'm sorry, Susan.
Hi, this is Susan Yankee. And this is a question for Jim Acabelis. When we get to hospital settings and clinical settings, I know a multi-layer approach is wonderful. So if you don't have VRI or an interpreter at hand, what I noticed, Jim, I want to ask if you knew about this. Yale seems to be offering a foreign language certification course or just certification for interpreters to their staff and clinicians. And I didn't know if this was something that could maybe be extended to people for ASL, because I'm sure they have staff members that might already know ASL, and possibly if they could be helped with certification, that would help in an emergency room situation in a pinch. Also, we can't forget about individuals that have come to deafness later in life, and making the hospital services accessible to them for those that do not know ASL and come into the emergency room without their hearing aids or without hearing aid batteries. So I just wanted to touch on that subject and see if you could say anything to that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, Kathy. Susan, I don't know the specific answer to your question about the training that you mentioned from Yale New Haven, but I have jotted it down and we'll look into that for our next meeting. I think it's an interesting issue, interesting way of maybe addressing some of the training issues. And your second question, I apologize, Susan, I have forgotten it.
That's okay. I just want to make sure in the conversation when we're talking about hospitals and access to communication, we remember people that have come to be deaf later in life that maybe don't know ASL and have forgotten their hearing aids in the rush to the emergency room, making sure we have something in place for that. Thank you.
Susan, I agree. I think that is a great point, as I am dealing more and more with my parents in healthcare settings who are falling into that category. So that is, I think, a great point. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That's really informative. I'm going to ask my two colleagues, Robin Comey and John Fusco, just to give them the opportunity to also jump in on these conversations. If they have questions for the groups or comments, and I'll go to Robin first.
Thank you very much, Kathy. You know, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us. I was really interested in hearing about the pinch points of some of the communication efforts and where some of those can be improved. Those are some very doable, actionable, you know, things that we can put in place just by breaking down flow charts and things like that. And I think breaking down the silos that is happening in some of these agencies and making sure that whether it's Alvin or the advisory board can, really connect with the information that they need, and putting forward the website as well, improvements to the website. One of the things that I was talking with, I believe it was with Susan Yankee offline, was about our local, emergency services, and just ensuring that if they show up at somebody's house, that they have a process in place. And what that might look like is that vary between communities and towns and cities. And I'd be interested in hearing the committees, the members of the committees input on some of that, and see if there's any room for improvement across the systems, whether it's the resources we provide as a state, or what we can do at the community level to make sure the needs are being met during an emergency, whether it's a natural disaster or a visit due to a 911 call. Thank you.
Is there
Thank
either
you.
through the agency, Andrew, or through the members of this group want to respond to what their experience has been with emergency services? Andrew, could you maybe talk a little bit about what you believe is supposed to be the structure that's in place, and then we'll move on to a committee member of the advisory group who might say what they actually have experienced, if you know, Andrew.
Are you talking about hospital visits when you talk about emergency services, or?
I think.
I'm sorry, could you expand on your question?
Sure. So Robin, when you talk about emergency services, can you be more clear which type of service you're referring to?
Andrew, I am referring to on the ground in our communities, our police, our fire, our emergency first responders, our selectmen's offices, our mayor's offices, and how they communicate out to our communities, to the deaf hard of hearing.
I don't think, excuse me, sorry, I had something in my throat. I don't think that there's necessarily a very specified protocol. It is hoped that, for example, when the governor does emergency announcements, maybe it's a snowstorm, maybe it's a COVID announcement, that they do their best, and it's never perfect. There was a time, for example, when the governor had no emergency announcement planned, but a member of the press asked him at some event, maybe it was a dormitory groundbreaking or something, some event, asked him about an emergency situation, and he provided some answers. And so all of a sudden you had a press availability regarding an emergency, which wasn't planned. And so there wasn't an interpreter provided. And some people were saying, geez, we didn't get to understand what was being said. So it's very difficult. And I know I've seen, I think the New Haven mayor have interpreters present when he's made some announcements, or previously she's made some announcements. But I don't think there's any specified protocol telling people exactly when they need to have, say, interpreting available for such an event. I mean, the established model, and it's not one that works for all events, is that if you're having a meeting, if you're having a presentation, whoever that might be, if a person who is deaf says, I plan to take part, and informs that body ahead of time that an interpreter should be arranged. It's certainly just not the case that town services, town boards and commissions have an interpreter present every time the Zoning Board of Appeals meets or the Board of Finance meets, or every time a policeman or policewoman goes out on duty. So it is a difficult situation if a policeman were to pull over a driver for a broken taillight and that person is deaf, or firefighters respond to a home and they need to get something organized and there's someone at the house who's deaf. It's a tough situation. And I know everyone who's deaf and hard of hearing in this meeting has had one of those lived experiences. But I don't want to pretend for you that there's a protocol that's set in place for everyone who runs a fire department in a town, a police department in a town, to tell them exactly what to do. If we did have, and when I say we, I mean broadly, we, state, the society, did have something in place, it would be a challenge for them to have an interpreter present and ready to go in every setting, just as the hospitals have that challenge. So I'm afraid I can't share with you a particular protocol that's in place, except to hope for and expect the good faith and good behavior of firemen, policemen, town authorities to, as quickly as they can, get someone in place. I had an experience a couple years ago with a man who was deafblind and had been online into taking a bus from Spokane, Washington to Hartford, Connecticut. And he was the victim of an online fraud. He was told there'd be a job here and that he had made friends with someone who would be here to help him. It was just the saddest thing. Now, the Hartford police got an interpreter there. And a lot of people here know Pat Clark. It ended up being Pat Clark. And then they called me up to come and help. And I got to tell you, I had to do some quick thinking and to help this guy help this guy out. It was a tough situation. But I will say, in that situation, a Hartford cop knew to make a call, and that call got Pat Clark there. And this was post-interpreting unit. And so she was able to, get some communication in place. But it depends on availability and the quick thinking of these personnel. And I guess that was a long-winded answer I gave you, Representative. So I'm going to stop now and recognize that there isn't this perfect system in place.
So I think what I'm hearing from you, Andrew, is that we need to look into public safety. So we have a public safety committee, which oversees the training of police officers. They also have all of the police chiefs fall under the public safety. So we're going to have Heather reach out to public safety and see what the statute is around the protocols for the deaf community, right? Because I think that we need to know factually what we have in place and what we don't. Because from there, we can change what's going on in the system. When it comes to municipalities, they fall under a different statute. So that's the thing that everyone has to understand, that every agency is different. We can have Heather reach out to CCMC, which is the municipality agency, and see what they know about what most municipalities are doing when it comes to making sure that individuals that are deaf have the services, or they have the mechanism in place to be able to service someone that is deaf. So we can look into that piece. That's why this group is important, because these are the things that we need to drill down to. Robin, do you have anything else before I move on to John?
No, thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. John Fusco, Representative.
Thank you, Kathy. I knew this was going to be a lot of information, and I was right. You didn't let me down. It's clear that all of you have been kind of going over these things for a long, long time. You're well versed on what you want to say. And it's clear the way that you articulate that everyone here has been engaged in this process for a long time. I'm glad that's a lot of information. That's why I'm here. I'm here to take that information and with my colleagues and also together identify what, some of the, I don't want to say foundational all the time, but because there's so much, and I totally understand, but I really want to get to a place where we can have a good start. And this was a lot of information. Some of the things were, when Sandy talked to me about, having people involved in, the certification process, for licensing in our state and so forth. And Beth, I want to thank you for clarifying that for me. In that the selection process and the certification process, I guess, for the state, that we don't have people from the deaf, hard of hearing and deafblind community. And that seems, I have a hard time understanding that. So Sandy, that made your concern very clear to me. And I agree with you on that. Harvey, in your early comments, I just want to say that I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. I think what you're proposing makes a lot of sense. And it's something that I think is going to possibly come to fruition here, along with the website that Jim was talking about in connection with that as well. Well, Louisa, the following through, I understand that. I get that. I've been a couple of your meetings. I've been involved, and I've heard all these things before, and I know that you feel like, not that you haven't felt like people haven't followed through, but we kind of haven't followed through, and quite frankly, that's probably the biggest reason why I reached out to Representative Abercrombie in the first place. She chairs our Human Services Committee of this state. And I served on Human Services with her, and that is a tremendous responsibility. And there is no way, she's almost like in the same place as Alvin. There's no way that she could do this by herself. She needed to have help, and she needed help from people who were engaged and were concerned and cared. And that's why I got involved in this process. And Kathy, one of the things that you said before about the prior statutory responsibilities from the commissions, once these things went away, these responsibilities still existed. And that's something that I'm going to get into and pour over a little bit to kind of see where we are foundationally, get what the ground rules are, see who's supposed to be doing what, kind of where we are. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I bring out of this is we need to find out, what the state is kind of supposed to be doing before we can kind of branch that out and find out how to best serve the language and communication needs and provide that access. One of the things that struck me was, when you said, Jim, that, if someone comes to the hospital, because I was concerned about that. If someone comes to the hospital and, how do they get the service? And you said that, they perhaps can get an interpreter, but that you maybe only contract with one company. And if they don't have someone there, then, you don't get an interpreter. That's problematic. And that's something also that I want to look into as well, because I think that that's probably something that probably comes up a lot, I would think. When I look at the agenda and it says, mental health issues, I think adding, medical to that is going to be a big part of that. So it's something that I'm going to consider. I know we wanted to talk about the education and the interpreting standards and so forth. I think we're all on the same page about what that needs to look like. And I think we'll figure out how to get there as a group. We have, I'm sure everyone is aware that the governors, and I'll get to where I'm going with this in a second, but I know that the governor has a liaison for a co-chair for the advisory group. That's in that position. It's my understanding through conversations with the executive branch that's not going to be filled. And I know that the advisory board members probably know that, but maybe some of the people here did not know that. So that position is kind of now being, going to be taken over by Alvin. And Alvin, I just want to say we didn't hear from you today, but I'm just I'm wondering what your thoughts are moving forward. It sounds like you're a man on an island out to sea, right? And look at I think you're going to play an important role here. If you are the initial liaison, look, I totally agree with everyone here. There's no way one person is going to be able to do this. To Louisa's credit, she has probably 3 or 4 people calling her every day because she is so deeply engaged in this process, right? But she's not the central communication for the needs, right? And access to communication. That's going to be you. And one of the things that I think that you're going to provide is what those needs are, right? So for every 10, 20, 50, 100, 200 calls, you're going to be able to quickly identify, what some of the main needs are. All needs are important. Don't get me wrong, right? But it's my responsibility and Representative Comey and Representative Abercrombie's responsibility to find out what we can cull out of that that best suits and fills the needs of all those concerns, right? And that's going to be a challenge. But you are going to be right in the thick of it, and I think we're going to rely on you quite heavily, not only over the next 5 months, but moving forward, in bringing forward future legislation to find out how we do that. So, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to hear from you a little bit on just your thoughts and your ideas and what you think your role is here and how it presents.
We'll switch interpreters at this time, if I may.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Alvin Shagay. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay.
No,
good.
Alvin, you're on mute.
So I am the representative here, as you all know, working with the deafblind, hard of hearing community, especially regarding communication issues. I've been here since September of 2020. So we're not even to 1 year yet, but we're getting there. There has been a lot of contacts made from members of the deaf community in Connecticut related to Department of Labor, hospital interpreting services, DMV issues. There's been a variety of them. I've also been contacted by 5 different independent living centers here in the state of Connecticut. So really, most of the issues is all about communication. I do try to help them out in regards to that, refer them to where they may need to go. Sometimes I have to refer them to the Department of Labor or certain things, but I have to then take time to really explain to that particular agency or that contact person I'm referring them to in regards to communication needs. Sometimes some of our consumers need a certified deaf interpreter, what we call a CDI. Some of our deaf community members are more oral based, so they rely on lip reading, are more oral supported signs. So there's different strategies, different approaches to the interpreting services that we need to provide. There have been contacts related to interpreter services being provided at hospitals. I've collected that information. Also, not only that, but Louisa's been part of it. She's kind of joined because individuals have been contacting her, as she has stated. So now we're getting involved with CHA. We have been since February. CHA has been doing this before I started in on this process. But in terms of just interpreters and the concerns that there are regarding certifications and the interpreters being used, we have to follow those statutes in terms of those standings, the RID, the NAD, other Massachusetts certifications. We have to ensure that all interpreters have a valid certification that hasn't expired. And so, yes, we do rigidly follow those mandates under the statute. Not only that, I follow that, but I am also currently in the planning stage of erecting a one-stop shop, as everybody has called it today, but we are just in the beginning discussion phase of that. We have been aware of this, we've recognized the need, and we've recognized the complaints from the members of the community. So we are breaking ground on that, getting the ball rolling. Now, in terms of Marissa, related to the interpreting website, we've shared with her, we've been in contact with her about the website. We've looked it over to see where we could tweak things, fill in some of the gaps, making sure that it's streamlined and to the point where we can disseminate that information. So we're getting there.
Thank you, Alvin, very much for that. I appreciate it.
So we have a hard 11:30 stop and it's 20 after 11 now. So I think we need to talk about what we want to talk about for the September meeting, because we're going to have to do some work behind the scenes to be prepared for that meeting. So do we want to stay on standards, interpreter standards as our first charge going into September? If you want to raise your hand, if you think that's acceptable, that would be great. And then if there's, if other people would rather move on to something else, we're open for that discussion. But all those that would like to stay on standards, please raise your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it looks like the majority would like to stay on standards. So when we talk about standards, I think what we're talking about is looking at the statute that we currently have to see if that needs to be amended, right? So I need all of you to kind of look at that and see what kind of really doesn't work as boots to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Then we also need to look at EMS services. What if there's a statute around that, and what does that entail, right? What is the responsibility of municipalities when they are called to an individual's home that is deaf? So we need to look at that. Then we also need to look at what the municipalities themselves are responsible for as far as their town halls and city halls. What accommodations, and I think this is sort of like under ADA and then also under state statute. So we need to look at both of those also. I think that right there is going to be a good place to start for the September meeting, because I think that right there will take up about 2 hours of the time. We will have interpreters at every meeting, as I said. We have a hard stop at after the 2 hours, which is 11:30. So Barbara, you've had your hand raised for a while. Would you like to just add some comments to that?
No, honestly, I can wait till the next meeting. I do just want to throw one thing out there, but not discuss it today. Alvin has been doing a great job. I just want to state that. He has been doing a great job. I personally thought he was working for the state system, focusing on VR, vocational rehab, and independent living centers. Anything outside of the state, so for example, hospitals and so forth, I didn't realize that that was part of his scope of work. So wow, that's a lot on his plate, I will say that. One thing that I would like us to discuss is just statistics. The statistics surrounding certain experiences, certain areas. I realize we cannot live in the past, but we do maybe need an office that can feed into the system. Asking legislatures, what are the statistics? Because we don't have that data. And I think that that helps us hone in our focus, getting that data to justify or support proposals of certain bills. So getting those statistics will help us in terms of narrowing down the services that we need to work on. Right now, a lot of our deaf people do not have access to computers, so I'm not sure if a one-stop shop website is the precise answer for us. So something to just kind of mull over. We are more in the community providing the access. We can't continue to that. I'm willing to try to continue, but we just can't keep on. And so that is going to be an issue, is just if it is a website, how do we get access to the website for those that don't have it? If we want to, again, establish some sort of organization, maybe, but that is not dependent on the state system, because right now the state system is not as user-friendly for our community. But like I said, I don't want to discuss any of this today. It's just throwing it out there on the table for people to mull over. And if hospitals are providing interpreting services, providing VRI until an interpreter shows up, sometimes it's a non-qualified, let's use that word, non-qualified interpreter. And so then the deaf people then have an objection to that because communication access is not met in terms of their individual needs. And so just talking about quality of interpreters when we talk about standards as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Barbara. We so appreciate your comments and how you've been a leader, especially with the advisory group over the since its inception 3 years ago. So I guess for definition wise, I think we need to find out under ADA if there's a definition for what's considered qualified or not qualified interpreter, right? Because the state statute is very clear on what the qualifications are to be an interpreter here in Connecticut. So I think we need to dig a little bit more and see if there are clear definitions under ADA that are for the different types of interpreters, right? So legal is very different than medical, right? So we're going to do some homework on that. I think the meeting in September, we might have more information as to what the standards, if there needs to be any amendment to the statute that we have. We'll also find out what agencies have in place. Right now, we're going to work with public safety first. We're going to have to break them down, each agency, because statutorily they're in different sections. So a statute isn't for all agencies. Statutes are specific to agencies. So we're going to have to break those down just to see where we need to make some amendments to that. Does that sound like a good place to start for September? Do you want to shake your head? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay. To my two colleagues, to Robin and John, any closing comments before we get ready to end this Zoom? Robin?
No, I look forward to seeing everybody in September, and I believe we'll be.
Thank you all again for being here, and I assure you that I am here to see this through.
And if anybody has any other thoughts, please feel free to email Heather, who is going to be the gatekeeper, because what she can do is forward your thoughts to John and Robin and myself, because we will be talking as we go along to figure out where we need to, what agencies we need to get involved with this conversation and where we go from here. Any other questions or comments? Sandy?
Yes, I'm just wondering if you recall, I did set up a work group for interpreter issues back in March with CHA and with different representatives. Do you want me to send out my summaries from that previous meeting back in March? That way you can know what we've already had some discussion on and really identify those, mainly the top 4 issues that we talked about. So I can send that out to everyone so that you can review, and hopefully that'll save us a little bit of time for during in between the meeting work.
Sandy, that would be so appreciated. If you could send it to Heather, because we need to have one gatekeeper with all of the material. So if you could send that document to Heather, she can keep that with the file so that we have everything together, and then she can send it out to everyone. That would be really helpful.
Sure.
That would be great. And then the other thing to consider, guys, is there isn't one agency out there that can be a gatekeeper for everyone in the disabilities community, right? So a lot of times we rely as a state on our nonprofits, right? And some of our organizations. So for example, in the autism community, right? We have ASRC, which is the Autism Resource Center out of Wallingford, right? So families contact them when they need services. And then from there, they contact the state to find out where there's a lack of them. That might be something that we need to start to think about also, is what role you guys play in being able to, oh, how cute Elvin, your son is. Look how cute he is. That might be something that you might all want to start to think about also, or what some of your organization's roles are that can help the state also. And with that, I say thank you to all of you for being here today. And, I look forward to the conversation and the material, and we will see you in September. Enjoy the rest of the summer. Thanks, guys.